amazing. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what's.
We are seeing the entire panorama as well as the three highlighted faces.
I'm so happy, and I'm also seeing that. So I'd like to see, instead of that, I'd like to prefer to see the gallery. There we go. We don't need to see, but we're the ones that are highlighted. All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning. To the best of your abilities, once again, I just want to invite all of those who are in the Zoom world to put on your camera at some point. I know that one of the beautiful things about not being in person is that you don't actually have to get dressed and for Shabbos necessarily, but I just want to invite you as much to be a part of this group in the way that this group is part of itself as well, so that we can see you. That kind of creates a bit more of a hello. So hi everybody, good Shabbos to the Zumagagers. Good to see your phonums, and wherever you are. Good to see the people here. We have coffee there. We have Nosh. We hope you have your coffee, your Nosh. We're going to jump in because almost always we want more time, so why not maximize it right now? And also, just before we start, let me just, it's been, how many years have we been doing open book? Like since 2011, I think. So now almost 12 years, going on 11 years. I just want to say that the last 2 years have been very challenging and remarkable also because we've seen the growth of the online community, especially in open book, which means that Torah is alive and well in the world. And people love learning Torah. They get up on Shabbos morning early to learn some Torah. I just want to say some of the obvious ground rules that maybe not have, they might have been made explicit before I got here or when I'm not here, but it's always the case when I teach that I feel like I need to go over some of the ground rules. So one thing that everybody has to be forgiving of, and I'm sure you all are, is that we're not going to be able to hear every single voice during an open book. As much as we'd like to have that become a reality at some point, we'll have to have a 3-hour open book for that. And it makes it very, very difficult. That's the reality. We are trying to combine sources and their voices and our own voices here in some kind of combination. And so we really appreciate your preemptive forgiveness for that. So that'll be awesome. Second thing is that I know that there are different styles of teaching, and some, like I think Rabbi Kolesis might differ about the chat or other teachers. I find the chat to be incredibly distracting as we're trying to teach, and I feel like it allows and privileges people to have conversations on the side that, of course, are not conversations that for now they're sacred and holy marginalia, as I spoke about last night. And at the same time, it's really my preference that we not have the chat open during the teaching and learning, but we actually maybe find another way to include voices from the open book, like an open book, like Sunday, where people write in all their marginalia and we can read them back and send them out as part of a weekly newsletter. I think that the voices of the community are beautiful, but it can be extremely distracting for other students and especially for me, the teacher. Although I am able to hold multiple, like I can do it. People know me in the Hasidic Masters. I'm reading the chat. I'm doing it. I just want us to focus on what people are saying and the conversations that are happening if we can. That's just one of the things I wanted to start with. So thank you for my public service announcement. Without any further ado, let's make our blessings over Torah and learn. Yeah? So let's do it together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher yeshanu mitzvotav
וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה.
Amen. All right, Gil, thank you. There you go. All right, I'm sharing the screen. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if you can see it? Yes, awesome. I'll make it bigger. Don't worry, I know that's always the next question. Without fail. Hold on 1 second. Single page. That's what I want. And now a little bit bigger so people can see. Okay. Is that good, everybody? Can you see? Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Vayu Chaye Sarah on the first source. We're going to start with what I'd like to look at today. We might have discussed this, but it's nice to learn things more than once. And first to take a look at some of the sources that I used for last night's sermon around the margins, around this wonderful midrash, and what Aviva Zornberg does with it, Dr. Aviva Zornberg and others, and then hear your thoughts as well on this. The chapter 23, and I'm doing that Zoom voice again where I'm yelling. Jeffrey always says you don't have. Can you speak? If I speak like that, can you still hear me? Everybody over there? Oh, that feels so good. Okay. The Parsha is chapter 23, and Parshat Chayei Sarah is only 3 chapters long. It's the shortest Parsha in the book of Genesis. It's basically, 4 weddings and a funeral. It's basically the funeral of Sarah and the conversation between Abraham and the Hittites, which our bar mitzvah boy will explore later today. The purchase of the burial plot, right? Marata Machpelah. It then moves in chapter 23, gives way to chapter 24, which is the Shidduch, the longest chapter in the book of Genesis, which is the remarkable story of Isaac's, Rebecca, the choosing of Rebecca and Rebecca's discovery, and the servant of Abraham goes to find her, and what she says, and how she becomes almost the embodiment of Abraham. We're not going to talk about Rebecca today, but this is a beautiful chapter. And then the 3rd chapter, of course, is the death of Abraham, and kind of sets up the scene for next week, which is Parshat Toldot, which is Isaac now has arrived on the scene. But the death of Sarah, though, has no warning. It comes out of nowhere, almost like the election of Abraham comes out of nowhere. It's like, what? And so chapter 22, which is the Akedah, and immediately precedes chapter 23, is the rabbinic assumption that smichat parshiot, that one parsha is connected to the next in some symbolic meaning, which of course might not be the case, right? It could just be that whoever was editing the Torah or whatever, God said, the end of chapter 22, Isaac comes back, he doesn't ever really connect with Abraham, the scene finishes, and then Sarah dies, right? But it's a bit odd, and it lends itself to midrashic, exploration, interpretation. So let's look at Rashi's gloss on this. But we begin with the psukim in chapter 23. Vayu Chayei Sarah, source number 1. Jeremy, would you like to read in Hebrew and also the English? You can do both.
ויהיו חיי שרה 100 שנה ו20 שנה ו7 שנים 2 חיי שרה. ותמת שרה בקריית ארבע, היא חברון בארץ כנען, ויבוא אברהם לספוד לשרה ולבכותה. Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her.
So look at Rashi. So verse 2, and Sarah dies. It's in, we know where it is. We're told it's in Kiryat Arba, which is now Hebron. It's in the land of Canaan. And then this very, very enigmatic and provocative statement, Vayavo Avram. And Avram comes. Right? Where does Avram come from? Where does he have to come from? He's clearly not with Sarah. It's a sad moment. He comes to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her. So Rashi feels the need here, right? Rashi doesn't always give us kind of a gloss. He only feels the need often, not always, but often feels the need to gloss only when we might be puzzled. So Rashi's like, oh, you're puzzled? Let me help you, right? That's what Rashi's, like, his intention is. So Rashi says, he wants to read Rashi. If somebody read Rashi, let's get an online folks here. Source number 2, maybe, let's see. Beth is always good for some reading. And I know there's a lot of folks there. Maybe Beth, can you read the source here, source number 2?
Sure. To bewail Sarah and to weep for her. The narrative of the death of Sarah follows immediately on that of the binding of Isaac, because through the announcement of the binding, that her son had been made ready for sacrifice and had almost been sacrificed, she received a great shock. Literally, her soul flew from her and she died.
Thanks, Beth. So in the Hebrew on the right side, right, Rashi says, Beth said, the reason why the death of Sarah is juxtaposed, nismecha is to juxtapose, or it's close to, because this is an amazing phrase, because of the Besorah. Besorah here means like the gospel, the good news, the giving of the news, the announcement, as they write in English, was really like something someone came and told her. We don't know how someone came and told her. We'll see that in a moment. That her son was like made ready for sacrifice. It literally means for slaughter, for shchita, to be slaughtered. And then this evocative phrase, which we'll spend the next 40 minutes on, 45 minutes. V'chim'at shelo nishchat, and almost was slaughtered. If not, like v'chim'at literally means if almost, right? He wasn't slaughtered. It really should be v'chim'at shenishchat. That's what's really also confusing. It should be v'chim'at and almost nishchat, and he was almost slaughtered. But here it's shelo nishchat, and he was not slaughtered, right? Meaning like he was almost slaughtered. It's kind of a double negative. It's a weird thing. Parcha nishmata mimena v'meita, and her soul, parcha means like it to blossom. Really, literally means like a flower is a perach. It means it bloomed. It kind of left. It left the house. It flew away like a ghost. And she died. Now, this is a remarkable, right? This is such a remarkable Rashi. And the reason why it's remarkable is because it doesn't really help anything. It's like he tried to make it only helps on one level, and it opens up a problem on another level. It helps us understand that for many midrashim, this juxtaposition of chapter 22 to chapter 23 is the locus, or it's the cause. There's a causal relationship. Akedah precedes death of Sarah because what? Because Akedah didn't kill Isaac, but it killed Sarah. Now, that's an intense thing to say. There's no textual evidence for that.
Well, there's no explicit evidence. The
Right.
evidence is, as you said.
Right.
just
I'm saying there's no explicit textual evidence. Exactly. That's more precise. There's no explicit textual evidence for that. But there's also it's also not in that it would seem it's even more problematic. The textual evidence is so flimsy. It's hanging only on the juxtaposition of these two things. And it's also problematic because you would think that if something so big as the death of the matriarch Sarah would be, you'd have some kind of explicit reference, right? If she died because of that, so that's the problem here for us is that it does explain it, but it also raises questions. And the biggest one, besides the lack of explicit textual evidence, is that Rashi's quoting the Midrash, and he chose amongst a number of different Midrashim, right? He had a number of different Midrashim open in front of him. He said, how am I going to help Ingber and the Roman community in the 21st century? Let me choose the Midrash that's going to help them understand the text. And of all of the different possibilities, he chooses this, that the death of Sarah is not caused by hearing that Isaac died, which is, you'll see in a moment, is available to Rashi. And rather, he chooses the Midrashic strand, the thread that says that it wasn't the explicit death of Isaac, that she thought for a moment he was actually dead, that kills her, but rather the news that he almost died.
Yeah.
And that's, we're going to see that. So let's look at the Midrashim here. The source number one for the Midrash is Rashi is quoting Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, which is a late first millennial Midrash. And in this one, this is really fantastic, right? So I'm going to read the Hebrew, and then I'll choose someone to read the. Actually, let me do the English first. So who wants to? Let's see. Get somebody in here to read the English. Any volunteers? Volunteers. I know Alina always likes to read. So can the owl pick up Alina's voice? Yes. If Alina can. No, we're here. So
when Abraham returned from Mount Moriah,
can you hear Alina? Not really.
Yeah, no,
when
Ronnie's
Abraham
shaking her head.
returned from Mount Moriah in peace, the angel of
The anger of
the
Samael.
anger of Samael was kindled.
Samael is the devil, Satan.
Oh.
Samael is Satan in our tradition.
For he saw that the desire of his heart to frustrate the offering of our father Abraham had not been realized. What did he do? He went and said to Sarah, "Hast thou not heard what has happened in the world?" He said to him, "No." He said to her, "Thy husband Abraham has taken thy son Isaac and slain him and offered him up as a burnt offering upon the altar." She began to weep and cry aloud 3 times, corresponding to the 3 sustained notes of the shofar, and she gave forth 3 howlings corresponding to the 3 disconnected short notes of the shofar, and her soul fled, and she died. Abraham came and found that she was dead. Whence did he come? From Mount Moriah, as it is said, and Abraham came to mourn for Sarah.
So in this midrash, it says, Chara apo shel Samael. Satan was really angry. He was really upset at his desire, as Alina was saying, right? He really wanted Isaac to be sacrificed. Ma'asa, what did he do? Allah, Amar la Sarah, hey, Sarah, that's literally in the Hebrew. Hey, Sarah, Aleph Yud, hey, Lo Shamat, did you not hear? Ma'ash and Asab Olam, did you not hear the news in the world? You're not up on the ticker, or like, CNN? Amra lo love, I didn't hear. So now Sarah is in a conversation with Satan. Yeah, everybody got that?
Yeah.
A satanic conversation. Amra la, he said there, lakach ishech, azaken, right? Your old husband, your old man, took your young son, Isaac, and he brought him up as a burnt offering, as a sacrifice. And the lad is crying, and miyalel, he's like, wailing. He cannot be saved. And now Sarah immediately begins to wail herself and to cry. And she cries 3 vichiyot, like the tikiyot, right? Long. Shalosh yilalot, keneged shalosh yivavot. And then she cries 3 broken ones, like the truah. And then her soul flies. She dies. And Avram comes and says, and he came to, right? Where did he come from? He came from Har Moriah. The Midrash ends with the implicit, or lack of explicit, but the textual evidence for this, this expansion. And in this model, let's look at Aviva Zornberg for a moment, because Aviva Zornberg, the great, this is her profound reading of this Midrash. And again, this is Rashi's source, but of course, Rashi doesn't quote this in full. He quotes the part about telling, like somebody tells the story. Doesn't say that it's Satan telling the story. Somebody has told Sarah, and Rashi gives this to us, and then he kind of elides over the fact that Satan gives the full story in a deceitful way, He says he sacrificed him, he lies. In this version of the Midrash, source 4, Satan lies to Sarah. He paints for her the horror and pathos of an old, demented father actually killing a helplessly crying child. Her death from a stroke or a heart attack might seem naturalistic, evoking no surprise were it not for the strange detail about her cries and wails, which are transformed into the throbbing shofar's wails. This surrealistic connection is found in many sources. Essentially, the suggestion is that Isaac's death cries, expressing the unsavability of the creature in the grip of overwhelming forces, are echoed mimetically by Sarah, also held fast in an irremediable anguish, and that these are reenacted in our ritual to redemptive effect. The shofar blasts on the new year are to transform Sarah's death into atonement, because the truah, the broken shofar tone, is a groaning and a wailing. This enigmatic etiology of the shofar cry is found in a whole range of midrashic sources. The more obvious notion that the shofar, the ram's horn, evokes the substitution of the ram for Isaac at the moment of actual sacrifice, thus takes on a more tragic and paradoxical cast. Isaac is saved, and the shofar does announce the possibility of redemption, of symbolic substitution, but Sarah is not saved. And in the world of her mind, Isaac is also not saved. And yet the cries of her and his despair are retained in liturgy and ritual as an atonement for her descendants for all time. What might this mean? So first of all, we're going to get back to Rashi's, the last problem, of course, which is why did Rashi, instead of saying that Isaac had died, say that he almost died and that killed Sarah? But here, just in our search for the source, we have this. We stop along the way to look at this remarkable midrash that is connecting the death of Sarah with the almost or sacrifice of Isaac, and connecting it to our Rosh Hashanah service, where we all thought that the ram's horn was reminding us that just as Isaac had been saved, and a ram's horn was substituted, we also might be saved, right? And something else substituted for us. That's what kapara means, right? The ram's horn is there to remind us that redemption is possible. You see, this ram's horn teaches you that Isaac was almost killed, but instead God was compassionate, and here's a ram's horn. But in this rendering, when we hear the broken sounds of the shofar, it not only reminds us of Isaac's redemption, but also of the loss of Sarah and of the pain along the way. That Sarah's cries were the cries of the mother who, even if the child was saved, still had to endure, right, the irremediable anguish of a child in pain. And in that sense, it complicates the shofar as not only the instrument of redemption, but the instrument that forever tells us the score of a life that no matter how good the ending is, has pain along the way. Like that pain doesn't go away. Even if we want to believe that the story ends well in the world, what about the reminder of all the pain that we had to endure to get there? Isn't life, right? It's like, it doesn't just go away because the book of life, I got put into the book of life, but along the way, what about the pain along the way? Is there a remembrance of that? So Yom Zichron Shu'ah, the day of remembrance of Shu'ah, becomes transformed in this midrash. Not just the remembrance of that it will be okay at the end, that the shofar will remind you of the song of freedom, right? It's a ram after all. Thank God. Whew, that was horrible, but thank God for the ram, right? But instead, now in this way that this midrash is brought by Dr. Zornberg, and the way that, Rashi, in some sense, connecting Sarah's, the midrash that connects Sarah's cries to the death of Isaac is in a sense an enshrining for all time the movement of pain that still exists in the world, even if stories wind up being okay, right? Even if, we find a cure for the disease, but what about all of the pain that we had to endure? It becomes like a moment of remembrance of that. So I'm going to stop here. We're going to move into the second midrash in a moment.
Quick question.
But first, I want to hold up for a couple of thoughts, knowing that we'll start with some folks in the room, and then we'll move to some folks in the Zoom. So Rabbi Koloresis, then Thomas, and then Rachel.
It's such a powerful symbol, like the shofar becomes doubly powerful in the way that Rabbi Zornberg and you have expressed it. But it also seems to me like the return of the repressed, because Sarah is so relentlessly left out of the Akedah. It's all about Abraham and God and the Yitzhak. And then suddenly she becomes the symbol, becomes part of the symbol of what saves Yitzhak. Right? So it's almost like she's returned to the Akedah.
How does she save Yitzhak?
No, I'm not saying she saves Yitzhak. She becomes part of the symbol in the shofar of what saves Yitzhak. It almost feels like a feminist vindication, because her pain now becomes part of the mainline story. And it feels to me like that's, something of a redemption. That her voice is now expressed there.
Needed to be included.
Yeah, exactly. Her voice is now included.
And even more, it's so beautiful because the mother whose voice is included in the shofar usually is the mother of Sisera, right? The mother of the general of the armies that assailed the Israelite armies. And so in the classic Talmudic literature, the source for the wailing, like how long the wail should be and what they are connected to this, and the mother of the enemy of the Jewish people. We're not going to go into all that now, but it's a profoundly beautiful part of the Jewish tradition to include that pain as well. And here, and the theme of the mother is such an important part of, and Sarah's usually included on Rosh Hashanah in a kind of negative way, right? Because Sarah is the one who banishes Hagar. And we always talk about how Nachmanides blames Sarah for that. Here, it's like, when we come to Rosh Hashanah and to the shofar itself and the story of the Akedah as its source, you're saying this connection brings Sarah's repressed or unasked for, like unsolicited voice. It kind of includes.
It's bringing her voice from the margins into the center.
From the margins into the center.
Into the center.
From the margins into the center. That's really, really, really important and really, really beautiful. Like, I think that feels so, that rings so true to me that's what's happening here. That's really beautiful. Really beautiful.
Very creative.
Very creative, but it was there, but Rabbi Kosh has brought it out. It's very beautiful. Thomas, and then Rachel.
Very briefly, just first this idea of redemption through reenaction. Strange, because that's just at the heart of the Catholic Mass and Catholic liturgy and Catholic theology, and every Mass is a reenactment of the Last Supper. Like you just restage it week after week. And so if that's a piece of Catholicity that's been taken out of the sound of the shofar, perhaps, there's something there. But my question very briefly was to ask if any of the sources assert that because of this narrative that the substitute ends up not being the ram, but Sarah herself.
That's implicit, and you'll see that Dr. Zornberg will come back to this.
Okay.
It's implicit in the reading here.
Okay.
And in fact, it's implicit in Rashi too, but of course, to say it that way would be more of a postmodern or modern or postmodern valence, but it's profoundly it's implicit in everything we're saying, and it'll be made explicit by the end of the class.
Everyone's saved except for Sarah.
Everybody but Sarah survives the Akida. If you can call that survival. Also, that's questionable. We'll see.
Right.
But she's the immediate proximate.
And the ram doesn't survive.
It becomes the sacrificial mother.
And this narrative
And
aspects of Isaac don't survive either.
absolutely, and we'll see that. And again, it's also complicated. I will come back to this one piece about the Catholicity. Like, it's funny to work from that place, right? We might say that, like Iliade, and we've spoken about this in the synagogue many times. Like the Seder, right? The entire rabbinic enterprise is a substitution for what took place in the temple. So you might see rabbinic Judaism as itself as a gesture of substitution theology, right? We say that that when we speak, our words are in place of the actual sacrificial offerings, right? So you can see this whole movement in the 2nd century towards substitution theology, or this notion that there was a primal or original, right? And then we are reenacting. And then, of course, from that, the proximity of the reenactment to the real thing becomes even closer. So you have like Iliade, saying things like the myth of, right, that all ancients, when they did the pagan rituals, it would be a return to the same place. It wasn't as if it were for real. And so when we see the rabbis talking about every person should see themselves as if they left Egypt, right? As if they left Egypt. It's like, really? As if we're leaving Egypt? Really, right? It's a real thing. You're really leaving Egypt tonight. So you see that, and the complexity of that also happening.
Also an adaptive response to trauma, reenactment.
Right, a reenactment for the sake of either trauma as reenactment or as working through, right? As kind of like, Freudian sense, like working through. So, and also reading Torah every year, right? The circle of reading Torah. Every time we read Torah, read these stories as if we're reenacting them. Okay, so Rachel, and then we have to have some Zoomers. We have some Zoomagogers, and then we'll come back, and then we have to keep moving. I'm sorry, I said from the beginning we have to move through. So Rachel.
I love what Rabbi said, and it made me feel much better that we have to atone for the fact that Sarah was treated like a nobody. Her husband sneaks out with the kid and goes off to do something kind of dumb. So Zornberg is speaking in English. And she says, our ritual now is as an atonement for Sarah's descendants. That is very undercover for what Rabbi Diane said. Zornberg is in like a transition women's lib generation. She is very modest. And I'm finding that as an atonement for her descendants could be taken both ways. It could also kind of cover up Sarah's proper role in this. Would have been to say, what? You're doing what? Wait a minute, let's sit down, let's talk about this. But they didn't do that in these days. And it's really, to me, a reflection on Zornberg that she's being so quiet about it. Atonement for her descendants in English is terribly ambiguous.
Interesting.
Rabbi,
Sorry. So for one is I don't fully understand your problem with Zornberg here. I think Dr. Zornberg is is actually completely opening these texts in ways that I don't think anybody's ever understood them before in quite the same way. And so her words actually are, she's trying to work within the notion that the ram's horn and the shofar is an atonement instrument. And she's trying to read into the atonement instrument, which she can't undo. She can't
Yes, of
say that
course.
the instrument isn't an atonement. And she's trying to say that because the Midrash links Sarah's wailing to the sounds that are emitted from the shofar on an annual basis and are themselves an atonement for, meaning that's why we use the instrument, it's kind of an atonement to wake us up and so on. She's saying that hidden in those sounds are the sounds of a Sarah who mimetically cried for her son. Now, you could say like either a feminist or a womanist reading of it and then a queering of it in some sense, Sarah, why did you die instead of standing strong when Abraham came home and saying, how dare you take this child who doesn't belong to you, my child, our child, and not have a conversation? That's a wonderful, I think that would be a wonderful Midrashic exploration to add. But I think that Dr. Zermig is working within the traditional Midrash and trying to read into that Midrash without making her own, like how she might, I think very powerfully and subversively, as you said, Rabbi Kolareses, is like, here's Sarah's voice here, and it echoes for the generations as the voice of all mothers who have ever have ever seen the pain of a world where their children are sacrificed or go through suffering because of, you name it, name anything you want to
War.
War, whatever it is. Okay, so I think we have to go forward, and there are a couple of people I'd like to call on 3 people in the Zoomagog, and then we'll move forward, and then we'll take more people after the next Midrash. Okay, Amy.
Rabbi, before you go, can we ask for the source sheet for the Zoom people?
Like the PDF, Kilo?
Yeah,
Kilo.
we usually give them away.
I know.
The Safaria link would be best, I think.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's right. Take the PDF and then follow along, please, and we'll send you the Safari link. Go ahead. So, Amy, go ahead, please.
Rabbi Ephraim Schwartz of Carmiel asks a question and gives an answer, but I would like to know your answer.
Amy, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have a lot of sources here that I'd like to go through. So if we can just remain connected to the sources that we just shared, that would really.
It does
connect.
Helpful. It does connect. Abraham first encountered the cave 38 years earlier when he was given the notice that Isaac would be born. But he doesn't buy it until 38 years later. Why did he wait? He was a good businessman. Why did he not buy it when it was appropriate? It was more, they charged him more because he had a dead body sitting there and they knew it was an immediate need. Why did he wait 38 years?
I'm not going to weigh in on that. I want to stay really close to the text here, but it's a good question for when we discuss at some point the purchase of Marat Machpelah. So thank you, Amy, for that exploration. I'm going to go on to Darius.
Sorry, I have a question about this Samael character, because I thought the Samael character was a different demon from Satan, because Jewish demonology is rather complicated.
Yeah, for our purposes here today, Satan will work, equally with Samael. We're not going to go into Samael and its roots. You're right. There's a lot in demonology and a lot in angelology, and the different Raphael and Samael and Metatron. It's all fascinating. But for our purposes today, some demonic character, whether it's Samael or Satan, is in a conversation with Sarah, our mother. Thanks, Darius. Ilana.
Shabbat Shalom. I wanted to weigh in on this topic of the reenactment and the transformation, and I think my comments follow on Rabbi Diane's, that I was thinking about another way in which this moment is a reenactment of the Akedah, in that Yitzchak is not given a choice by Avraham, that like with the Akedah, these big decisions are being made for him. And some of the heart of the transformation for me is that when we first see Yitzchak, he's coming from where he's living next to the well of Hagar. And when even though it's not his choice to marry, he's given this choice not by his father, but by Eliezer. Which suggests some of the ongoing lasting trauma of the Akedah, in that he's not in direct contact with his father. And then the transformation, though, comes via his mother. So he marries and he finds love and comfort in the tent, which Aviva Zornberg points out also is the root of the tent is light. With the light,
we're actually gonna look at that source at toward the end. Yeah, we're gonna look at that source from Aviva and towards the transformation of Isaac's character through the marriage to Rebecca. Can you hold off this last little piece until we get there?
I just want to end, though, with this link to what Rabbi Diane was speaking to, that this transformation of the Akedah is embedded in the mothers, in the image of the well and the location of the tent of the mother. And that, that's how Isaac is located.
Beautiful. So we're going to come back to that at the end. This is a really perfect way both to segue into and then towards the third piece of this morning's class. So let's look at this next source, which is the real proximate source for Rashi's remarkable, almost killed. Right here in Midrash on source number 5, it's in the Tanchuma. Right, see the Tanchuma here, the Midrash Tanchuma? Yeah, source number 5. So, Vayishlach Abraham es yado, vayikach es ha'ma'acheles. And Abraham reached out his hand to grab the knife, right? Now, what I skipped here in this second midrashic source is that in this source, Satan is actually a very complicated character, or the demonic. It knocks the knife out of Abraham's hand, which is why he has to now go and grab it again, as if the midrash is asking the question: why does Abraham have to grab the knife? Wasn't he already holding it? Presumably he is, and so why does he have to grab it again? So there's this midrashic tradition that Satan knocked it out of his hand just as he was about to kill Isaac, which also complicates it, which is he's kind of almost delaying it. What is Satan's fault there? But here's what happens in this second midrashic source. That moment when he went out to grab the knife, a heavenly herald or voice spoke and said, please do not send your hand against the al, which is do not. Al. The ilulei chen, had it not been so, kvar haya nishchat, he would have been slaughtered. Now look what happened in the second midrashic source. Rendering Satan goes to Sarah, but now doesn't stand in direct conversation with Sarah as Satan, but rather in the image of Isaac, transformer, becomes Isaac. So now Isaac is standing in the presence of his own mother, but it's Satan. She sees him and she says, my child, my son, what did your father do to you? It's amazing, because how would she, does he look different? Is something happening here? I mean, is there some visual expression of trauma or something? She says to him, what did your father do to you? Amar la, he said to her, Nitalani avi ve'alani harim horidani b'ka'ot ve'alani l'rosh ha'ar echad. My father took me, he raised me up the mountains and took me down to the valleys and then on the dale. And then he took me to this one big mountain. And he built an altar. He made this altar, he put arranged the wood, right? And took a knife, right? He bound me to it and took a knife, the shachteni, to slaughter me. Lulei, and then this word ilulei, had it not been, Shamarlo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God had not sent to him, Al tishlach yadcha lanar, do not, right, send forth your arm to the child, to the lad. Var hayiti nishchat, I would have been slaughtered. V'lo speak l'gemorta davar ad sheyatza nishmata, and he did not complete the matter before her soul had departed. Hadahu dichtiv, that's what it means. Vayava Abraham lispod l'Sarah v'livkota, and Abraham to eulogize Sarah and to cry for her, to wail for her. Me'echan ba Mehara Moriah. Where did Abraham come from? Mount Moriah. If you look at Aviva Zornberg in source 6, unpack this midrash, and then we'll see where we are. In this version, a more subtle anguish, a more terrible irony leads to Sarah's death. But the devastating fact is that Isaac is clearly alive in Sarah's eyes, as he tells the unbearable saga of his father's murder or attempted murder of him. On the face of it, Sarah dies simply because of lo speak. Were the phrase, there was not enough time, he didn't finish. Lo speak, it's almost, she couldn't endure to the end of the story, or as I heard it as a child, when I learned this, it was as if the blame was on, Satan was smart in saying it in the way that he said it, because it kind of, got killed almost, was the way that I had learned it as a child. That there's a way in the phrasing that she actually did believe that he had been killed, and that, because, he didn't get to the end of the story and she had already died, right? That was why I heard it. But here it's like there's something about lo speaks, something, there wasn't enough time, she couldn't endure. Before Satan can furnish the redemptive denouement, destroyed artfully and precisely Sarah's vision of her husband and of her life's mission. Satan's tale is told as subversion. The ending is almost irrelevant, for Isaac stands before her, a ruined Isaac, who can only elicit horrified questions from her. What has your father done to you? The ironic force of the midrash that lies not so much in the lo speak, the fact that the relief of resolution is delayed, which is of course a classic literary strategy, the love letter that arrived 50 years or one day too late, but in the ilulei, had it not been, the remorseless fatality that is interrupted almost arbitrarily. Abraham's will to kill Isaac, narrates the midrash, would have known no softening. Effectively, Isaac would have been dead were it not for ilulei. And here's where I think this is remarkable. What Aviva Zornberg then burnishes here. She dies of the truth of the kim'at shelo nishchat. This phrase that Rashi had kind of taken from this midrash and melded together with the previous midrash, that what kills Sarah is not the fact of Isaac's death, but the fact of his almost death, of that hair's breadth that separates death from life, what Sartre calls contingency, the nothingness that lies coiled in the very core of being like a worm, right? This is we can stop there. Go to the last line though here, forget about the moral. The knowledge of one's contingency, the vertigo of being is expressed in the instant being symmetry of equivalent possibilities.
Yes.
And this phrase from Dr. Zornberg is just a remarkable phrase, because it essentially, and as she goes on to explore, that the problem of Rashi was that Rashi seems to be saying something that most of us think at face value is actually not very elucidating. That Sarah dies from the almost news, many of us would actually throw up our hands and say, wow, that's amazing. Like, look how close you were to death and you were redeemed. In Aviva Zornberg's reading, which I think is so powerful, and I experience this, a lot of us experience this on a regular basis, but certainly in the last 2 years, the dizzying possibility of equivalent, right, of equivalent possibilities, the instability of equivalent possibilities, that you're standing on a street corner, as I said last night, and only one step separates you from death. Or if you're in a war, it's not just that your friend died next to you, but the fact that you didn't, right? That there's nothing, right? The arbitrary nature of reality is kind of exposed. And in Rashi's rendering here, it doesn't seem clear, right? In the beginning, through the prism of the second midrash and of Dr. Zornberg, it becomes profoundly existential. That what kills Sarah, or if not killing her, whatever metaphor you want to use, ruins her life, takes away her faith, takes the rug out from underneath her, is something that would also ruin many of us as well. And that in some sense, some exposure to the kind of instability of life, that coiled nature of being, that we're only a hair's breadth away, had it not been for that moment that the letter came. You hear this in Holocaust stories, right? The knock on the door or the line, what was it that separated me from that one? And why were they chosen and I wasn't? And so on. This kind of inability, right? Primo Levi talked about this, it's so profoundly part of what it is to survive in the world, and it can ruin you. It can absolutely, the kim'at shelo nishchat can be completely unmooring. Now, I'm gonna just end and then open up. It's not over though, because of course, as Ilana just brought, and as Aviva Zornberg talks about the negation of negation, right? Aviva Zornberg talks about Andre Neher, the great French existentialist who wrote about the negation of negation, and Paul Ricoeur, that in some sense, if you read the narrative, Al Tishlach Yadcha is all negative. Do not, right? The do not, right? And so in her rendering, the end of chapter 24, right after Isaac, who is of course nothing like what he was before, he doesn't get a blessing from his father, Abraham. He's not able, right? All the blessing now comes to his mother to some degree, and the narrative turns now to Isaac and the feminine, right? He moves from world of being sacrificed. His mother passes away, and now 3 years later he marries. And chapter 24 kind of narrates, right, how that takes place. But in some sense, the response to what she calls the vertigo of being is an affirmation of life. So if you look at source 7, Vayivi Eha Yitzchak al Ela Sarah Imo, and Isaac brings Rebecca into the tent, not the tent of his mother, Sarah, who, by the way, is here. This is the only time she's mentioned as his mother, Sarah Imo, right? In previous cases, he's called my son. It's from Sarah looking at Isaac, or he's called the son of Abraham, right? Or she calls him my son, but we don't ever have, right? Sarah Imo. We have Abraham Aviv, but we don't have Sarah Imo. And so his mother, Sarah's tent is still alive and well. And he brings Sarah into his mother's tent, which is edipally very fascinating, of course, right? I think fascinating, troubling, intense. And he takes Rivka, and she becomes his beloved wife. He loves her, which is amazing. First time the Torah tells us that someone loves someone in this way is here. Yitzchak loves Rebecca. And now the Torah tells us, it's like so beautiful, he's comforted Acharei Imo, after his mother. And that phrase too, after his mother, is very evocative too. After his mother, after the death of his mother, right? She comes after him, the aftermath of his mother. Also Acharei Mos, Acharei is very powerful. And so one last, Aviva Zornberg, and then we'll open up to everybody, just in terms of what Ilana was sharing and connecting to Rabbi Korasis earlier. According to one Midrashic source, at least Sarah has been dead for 3 years when Isaac marries Rebecca. Comfort for is not simply the fact of her death. This is the Midrash in Midrash HaGadol. 3 years Isaac mourned for his mother, and every time he entered her tent and saw it in darkness or dimmed, he would tear his hair. That's a very powerful image. But when he married Rebecca and brought her into the tent, the light returned to its place. And Isaac brought her into the Ohel. And Ohel, as Ilana pointed out, means light, as it is said in the book of Job. Of all places to find a source to tell you that the tent can be light, it's the book of Job, the book of horrible things happening to people, loss and grief and destruction and catastrophe, a book that essentially interrogates reality and wonders if it's even worth it. And so here's the source text: till the moon will no longer shine, which there uses the word ohel as light. He was comforted and saw it as though his mother were still in existence. And that's why it says Isaac was comforted after his mother. And Dr. Zornberg says the implicit understanding behind this midrash is that Isaac does in reality suffer a kind of death at the Akedah. His mother dies, and with her the light of her tent. In an astonishing fusion of images, the tent of her intimate life becomes the energy that affirms life. Light, claims the Midrash, is by definition the meaning of ohel. To have left one's tent in darkness is the value of being, meaning life. The anguish of Isaac's reaction as he enters the condition of his mother's life expresses a desperate involvement in the wailing of her end. With Rebecca's coming, the energy of hope returns because he now can see his mother's life as though she really had her being. Through the prism of his relationship with Rebecca, his mother's existence, her kiyum, becomes vital, again. So it is like the redemptive element here is just, in Rashi's gloss, right? In Rashi's gloss on Parshat Chayei Sarah, we have like the death of Sarah connected to the Akedah. We have her wailing connected to the power of the shofar. We have the idea that Kim'at Shalom Nishlat, that you can live your life at the margin and in the world of its almost can take your life. And then we have chapter 24, which brings the light of Sarah back through the prism of a rebirth, of a reconnection, and a negation of negation, to say in spite of it all. Really, that's the powerful line is Af al pi chen. In Aviva Zorber explores this, that people who have experienced nothingness at the heart of existence can then say, rising up, even Af al pi chen. And that's chapter 24 for Dr. Zornberg, and for us is even so, even with the death of my mother, even with the loss of that voice and that power, life is still has possibilities, the waking possibility. Okay, so we're gonna take some more thoughts and feelings in the room and then in the Zoom. Your hands up in both places. We're gonna start.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll move around to Paul, and then we'll go to our online community. Go ahead.
So I'm Elizabeth, and I apologize for interrupting before. So I can't shake it. I have a much darker view of all of this. For me, Sarah dies because it's coming back to her that there was another child who almost died, but there she was the agent, and she thought it's like Macbeth thinks he's killed Banquo, but the ghost of Banquo is there, and the reason that he kills Banquo doesn't work out. And here, Sarah's finding out about the almost, except that she dies because she found out about the almost death of Isaac, brings back to her, and it's something that's already in her that she thought she had conquered, but no, here it is, and that's why she died. So, just throwing that out.
So I'm just hearing this though, but in your rendering now, this is a karmic comeuppance for Sarah. So what do I say? Just the upshot of that is that it's beautiful, karmic comeuppance. I thought the Akedah was her karmic comeuppance, but here you're saying like if you have been insensitive to the almost death of someone else, then you yourself will wind up experiencing the almost death of something that is near. And in that moment, maybe she feels Hagar's anguish, or she feels her own complicity in that guilt or something about that, right?
Guilt
slash horror kills her, which is really painful to think about because it didn't kill Hagar, and Hagar was there watching it, but it kills Sarah.
And Abraham marries Hagar.
It wants to marry Hagar, but I hear it, like beautiful to bring those two together. Chapter 23 brought together with at the end of chapter 21.
Doesn't take away the contingency. It just
Totally. It's just that it's a different contingency. Now, and are you saying it's also the almost death of Isaac and the almost death of together, or them both of them? Got it. And said she got it. And in many ways, it's actually strong because in the first contingency of Isaac's almost death, she is experiencing the powerlessness. All of us feel powerless vis-a-vis the contingency of life because we're not in charge. I mean, forces bigger than us that are impossible to control. That's our contingency. In the Isaac story, Abraham is the proximate cause of her contingency because my husband acted in a way, which of course, as Rachel said, in some silly way, tried to sacrifice my only child and our only child. But broader than that, God in that story is really like Abraham can say, listen, God told me to do it, whatever. But here, she has no one to blame but herself because she's the proximate cause for the contingency of Ishmael's life. She's the one who banishes Hagar. And so in some sense, she realizes that she brought someone else to the place of contingency because of her own power. I had power over their fate, and I acted in a way that was not noble, and it's beautiful midrash. Love it. Paul.
I was actually going to say something very similar. Well done. The only thing that I would add to that is we're talking about the centrality and agency of of Sarah. She's not a victim anymore. Things are not happening to her anymore. She is the agency, an agent of her own anguish. And so as a consequence, her death is by her own hand. It's not Satan, it's not Abraham, it's not anyone else. It's her own recognition that she herself is culpable for the potential death of two other people.
Right, so that's a different read, and it also undercuts the read of, in some way, it cuts it cross table to Rabbi Koresis, and others were reading the wails of Sarah as the wails of someone who is, in a sense, the victim of the Akedah, of her own, like the enshrining of that in the wails of the shofar is, actually lifts up the unfortunate and immoral passivity of Sarah because she was left out, as it were. Here you're saying the opposite. In some sense, Sarah has become a full agent in many other ways, and her own death is another example of her agency. Like she realizes I had agency in ways that I didn't, and she feels culpable, and the death is right from a certain level of culpability. All beautiful. Sarah, I don't think Sarah's here to complain either way. She's happy that we're talking about her, and we're learning what we need to learn from her. We'll say that what's remarkable in the Midrash, I actually unfortunately removed it from the second Midrash, is that in the Tanchuma, which we saw yesterday, Isaac says to Abraham, don't tell mom about what you're doing when she's standing on a roof or in front of a pit because she'll throw herself in and kill herself. Ooh. And so we have a very powerful part of the Midrashic tradition that sees, right, that there is a conversation between chapter 23 and what's happening in chapter 22 around agency and around news being shared and all of these things. So a couple of people online have been waiting so patiently. Nehemiah, and then Jay and Marilyn. Go ahead, Nehemiah.
Shabbat Shalom, Kihila Kedusha. It's so good to be with you fully again, because last week my camera didn't work. And I want to support and empower the line that comes, that the pain brings redemption. And personally, the Smichut Parshiot, it's so close to what happened 2 weeks ago on Friday at midnight. My brother Amishai, a gift to my people, left this world in flying color, like our friend Evelyn Goodman. After 6 months of slow dying from brain cancer, when he was rising emotionally and spiritually to discover all the pain that he hidden all through his life, from being the one that gave the pills unknowingly to the mother to commit suicide, and from all that happened before when our father died. He opened emotionally to express it, and at the end, after 78 years of being secular kibbutznik of Shomer HaTzair, he came to believe that we'll keep on talking from the other world. The miracle, spiritual miracle of awakening. And we do talk.
Amen.
Now, for this parasha, let me speak about this parasha for 1 minute. Chayei Sarah, in the non-dualistic way, Samuel I interpreted as God put him there. God put him, because the pain that Samuel caused is part of our redemption. Is a servant of God in a very non-dualistic way. And Sarah, when she goes through all this pain, Nishmata parcha, this double meaning of parcha, it's flayed away and it's flowered. Who knows who is Sarah now, and if she come to visit again as another tzaddik, who knows?
That's right.
And for us personally, I finish with this. The more pain we get, I finish, this is the last sentence. The more pain we get, and we can handle it, the more we can rise. So don't think pain is something negative. Sorry, that's it.
Nehemiah, Todah, you gave us a number of gifts. First of all, your brother's neshama also have a flowering, a blooming, which I didn't know, and so I'm really, really touched by that, and we'll be in touch with you about that. And thank you for the non-dual reading of Parcha Nishmata. It's really beautiful, especially as the winter comes. You know, the word in Hebrew for winter, choref, and the word perach are the same letters. So there's something about the winter they're speaking to. The word harif, which means spicy, also it means that things in our lives that are sometimes very difficult for us to metabolize are themselves a source of something that opens flavor, and the perach that is your Sarah's neshama and your brother's neshama should have an aliyah. And beneath the snow, there's a rose, as Bette Midler taught us, right? There's something beautiful there that can blossom. We are unfortunately out of time, so I'm going to take one more, Jay, and then thank you,
I'll
Jay.
cut to the chase. I'll cut to the chase. Sarah is invisible. Sarah is not present. The Parshas Chaye Sarah, there's nothing about her life. Even her death is just matter of fact, how old she was and where she died. Sarah is invisible. She's silent. The shofar breaks that silence. What is better narratively than a shofar to break the silence and connect her death with the Akedah? I'm a Baal Tzikiah, and for me, Shivarim is also a reminder and acknowledgement of the pain of all those who have no voice.
Thank you. So I want to actually get Jessica in and come back to Jay, and then we'll close. So Jessica, go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, Shabbat Shalom. I just very briefly want to speak for Sarah as someone who almost lost a child myself. That almost losing of a child, especially when she fought so hard for him. She fought so hard and waited so long to have him. Then she, did this really questionable thing to Ishmael and to Hagar to protect, in her eyes, Isaac, and now she almost loses him in that line, "What has your father done to you?" It really strikes a chord in me, and I think that there's something that we just need to feel that empathy for Sarah at this point when she is almost losing something. And I remember when my child was dying of cancer, and that sense, and she didn't die, but there was that sense of that liminal space of how did this happen and why did this happen? And it wasn't random because Abraham.
Yeah, Abraham was involved. So thank you all. I think for me personally, both coming back to both Jay and Jessica. First of all, Jessica, we were with you obviously when that was happening, and so thank you for sharing that again, and thank you to everyone who shares personal things. I'll say personally for myself, I personally know what it is to live on the margins of things for many years. Like in my own household, we had, as I've discussed in this community at different points, and in many other people's households where things are on the margins, where you don't have room, let's say, for or spaciousness around safety, or where there's a sense of almost the limits and being overwhelmed with stress. Like the part of the beauty of this parsha and its profundity, let's put for a moment whether or not Sarah has agency. I think Sarah is much more agentic than you gave her credit for, Jay, even though I appreciate the desire as a Baal Tokeh to lift up her voice. I think Sarah's voice is very strong in this deeply patriarchal text in many ways. In many ways, we wish that she had a more, the kind of freedom or agency that we have see in our own individual lives now retrofit onto the Bible. There are many moments where Sarah's voice is not present. That's true. Many moments where her voice is fully present. So I think that those who are lifting up Sarah's voice here is also very poignant at a time when voices are marginalized, literally pushed to the margins. I also think it's very beautiful to be compassionate towards Sarah as someone who fought her whole life, and her whole identity was connected to the birth of Isaac, and everything she was connected to Isaac. From the moment that the Torah introduces her, she's known as the one who was barren, and to have Isaac was to be redeemed in some way, and that to lose that is also profoundly instructive for all of us. But I think that what I wanted to bring out here today is that for 2 years, and continues to be the case, we can live in a world where things were what it's like to live for 2 years in the almosts of things, where around every corner there was danger, at every countertop and in every exchange, in every elevator, in every interpersonal connection, there was a potential of almost. And I think to have that hovering over your head can be a corrosive element of your life. And one of the things that's beautiful, if now maybe becoming more and more ubiquitous again, is the banality of just being able to sit in a room together without danger. Like to have that element of our, like that today you'll leave today not wondering, hopefully, whether or not you were safe or whether or not you understood the Midrash is a miracle, right? That you'll walk out of this building, and even though life is contingent and nobody knows what will happen from the moment we walk out of this door of this building, we really don't know. And we live in a reality of Kimat Shalom Nishkat. We don't know, right? We don't know what precedes the moment before, who knows? But at least that in these moments here, to some extent, we've reduced the Kimat Shalom Nishkat quotient. Like the quality of like, that was dangerous as kind of hopefully is lowering more and more and allowing us to have more chaye, more life, right? That's like chaye Sarah, like to have more of our life in some level. So I just want to say that to bring attention to that this weekend. Tomorrow, as I said last night, is the World Memorial, the universally declared by the UN and other countries are honoring this, that we remember those whose lives were taken on the streets of our cities and other places by traffic accidents that could have been and almost always are avoidable, almost in these instances, right? Where it has to do with living too close to the margins, living too close to the edges of things. And God should give us really the inspiration to make more space around the edges of our lives and the edges of our interactions, and to have more breath, more of that, right? More of that space. That's my prayer for all of us. There's a wonderful bar mitzvah student named Elias, who's hoping that all of us will show up to support him this morning. His service begins at 10 o'clock in 6 minutes, everybody. Shabbos, everybody. Shabbos.